Okay, here we go. So this will be a risk society, individualization. So the main argument in risk society, chapter 3, individualization, the author Ulrich Beck makes the claim that we are witnessing a societal shift similar to the Reformation, where individuals are no longer bound by class, stratification, family, and gender status. The central idea is that we are shifting away from a communal society to an individualist one. Beck points out that the individualization of our society is a result of numerous historical events that have changed the way we react to the world. We, as individuals, now view ourselves as the most important and therefore treat our relationships with others as secondary, while focusing on methods of improvement instead. However, this process can have negative impacts on each other, as well as ourselves, as well as introduces new risks in our lives. But we are so focused on self-progress that we do not notice the lack of safety nets we have or inequality among our society. So what does this all mean? First off, what is individualization? So Beck never outright gives a specific definition, but gives plenty of examples to sort of give an idea of what it is. All right, so it's the self-centering of an individual as a result of numerous historical events that have changed the way we perceive relationships with others, choosing instead to be alone instead of having any form of relationship. Furthermore, the social chain is a form of isolation that allows for self-progression without an increased risk, or with an increased risk. So one of the questions asked was, how have things changed according to Beck? Well, societization, which is kind of what our society used to kind of deal with as individuals, is no longer the process we ascribe to. That is, the individual never truly enters into a community without benefiting from their participation, but they do not become dependent on them, given the constant need for reevaluation of the benefit of continuing said relationship or communal involvement. Classes have also disappeared, sort of. Unlike in the past, class division is no longer a prevalent part of your own identity. This is likely due to an increased accessibility to the market, according to Beck. While this may seem completely positive, the negative side of this is that while class association may have you in a lower class in society, you're a member of that community. By doing away with classes, you're responsible solely for yourself, and it is you who has to be prepared should any bad situation come about given the lack of community. Whereas, excuse me, in a class society, you have that community whom you share a commonality with to reach out to. In essence, the market has changed the individual, and the new mentality is similar to Homo economicus, where we're always self-interested, rational individuals constantly competing. So why does all of this matter? Why is individualization the more important factor in our current lives in what we ascribe to? Individualization is important to understand because we are, in essence, kind of going back and diverging back to what Beck calls, or what Beck refers to as Homo sapiens, or even further beyond that, almost to where society becomes sort of an outside thought. And you're basically just trying to survive on your own, but that doesn't have to necessarily be the case. One of my first quotes kind of talks about the negative effects of things. It reads, among the negative effects of individualization processes are the separation of the individual from traditional support networks, the loss of supplementary sources of income, along with this, the experience of an increased wage and consumption dependency in all spheres of life. So I chose this quote specifically because it talks about the issues of individualization and sort of the negative progression, even though individualization allows for positive progression through class mobility and of sorts, because you're no longer tied to any specific person because you're focused on yourself. So in the context of it, we talked about this quote when kind of going through some of these that Beck goes through in his argument to describe individualization as a whole. So my second quote was, for him, this capitalist process of isolation and uprooting had always been cushioned by the collective experience of administration and the resulting class struggle. Marx thought it was precisely the process of emancipation and uprooting and deterioration of the living conditions of workers under capitalism that led to the transformation of the working class from a class in itself into a class for itself. So I chose this quote specifically because I felt that it described individualization probably the best. And Beck even kind of goes on to talk about Marx as the most individualist, or the best at explaining individualism of sorts. So when it comes to Marx's main thing with individualization, it was a byproduct of the capitalist process. And Marx even goes on to talk about capitalism as a system, having one way out and having to choose that door, so that uh, socialist society could rise up, because that was positive progress in his eyes, because of individualization being a byproduct of the capitalist system, because you seek to move up and seek to constantly improve, and as we've seen in doing this, you leave yourself in a very vulnerable state because you're by yourself and you're sort of isolating yourself. And so my last quote was, whether they transcend the local sphere or not, they are formed on the basis of interests, ambitions, and commitments of individuals who regard themselves as organizers of their own circles of context and relationships. And so this last quote I chose specifically to kind of describe the social connections that you choose, and kind of related to Homo economicus, in that you're being irrational about who you choose to be around, no longer having to ascribe yourself to one specific unit of family or any form of relationship that was forced upon you if they do not benefit you anymore. And so my thought-provoking question was, given what we have read about neoliberalism and Brown's undoing the demos, is individualization a byproduct of our societal shift to a constant state of Homo economicus? Given that Homo politicus kind of allows you to think freely and, think in a rational mindset outside of self-improvement, I felt that this was a really interesting thing to think about.